Portugal has historically been a very faithful ally of the United Kingdom, having the longest standing alliances in the world. But what if they decided to take their chances at expansionism in the First World War? What if Portugal didn't just ally with Germany once, but twice? What would they do in the Second World War? Historically, Portugal joined the Allies in both World Wars, so if we reverse this, I think that it would have dire consequences for the Portuguese, which we are about to find out, so sit tight and listen. Having Portugal join the Central Powers is very hard to do, I cannot stress this hard enough. You are more likely to guess a random number I picked from 1 to 100,000 than of Portugal to join the Central Powers. Anyone who said 14,904 is a real one. Anyways, I looked into it and I cannot find a realistic or plausible way to have the Portuguese join Germany that wouldn't alter our timeline too much. Here is my reasoning for how this could happen, and also as a disclaimer, this video is very unrealistic and probably wouldn't have happened. No more than a minute into the video and we already have a disclaimer on realism, so you know that it's going to be a fun video. From 1911 to 1912, there was a revolt in East Timor, which resulted in the deaths of 289 Portuguese soldiers. While we can have this revolt to be successful, I suggest that it's larger and encompasses more native tribal leaders who would be more motivated to join this rebellion. Portugal would still win this, but suffer much greater destruction, with the president at the time, Manuel de Aranha, would assume that these rebels had outside help. With Portugal having abolished the monarchy in 1910, which the British were very fond of, he might come to the conclusion that it was the darn Brits who helped the natives, and have a falling out with them, with Germany swooping in to support the Portuguese economy like Britain did historically. Another way we can achieve this is by looking over the Pink Map incident, where Portugal used to have a claim for Mozambique and Angola to be connected, but Britain wanted to connect Cape to Cairo, and this Portuguese claim would prevent them from doing so. As such, the Brits decided to bully their ally into giving them concessions in nothing for return. While I could use this as a point of divergence for Portugal to become more anti-British and more pro-German, I don't think it's too realistic. As I said, there were no realistic plans or considerations for Portugal to join the Central Powers. By the year of 1914, Portugal would have almost recovered from the recession they'd had to face from breaking away from the British sphere. If they do some war profiteering during the Italo-Turkish War, we can have this recovery to be better and quicker. Now with Portugal joining the Central Powers, let's get to the actual interesting part of the scenario, which is the Great War. The First World War would start the same way, Gavrilo Princip shooting Franz Ferdinand, sparking off the web of alliances, which would become the First World War. However, I don't see Portugal joining it right away. It will take a few months before they do. I do expect them to start mobilizing, however. Around the same time, the Ottoman Empire would join the war, or perhaps a little earlier. Portugal would declare war on France and Russia, but not the British as a courtesy of their former friendship. However, this would immediately be violated as Britain would declare war on Portugal. The Portuguese would join the war hoping to get the Pink Map borders, maybe expand Goa and Portuguese India in general, as the Portuguese Empire was on the decline, which the ruling regime would like to reverse, seeing Britain as a fake ally and a betrayer of the Portuguese nation. Now, having Portugal join World War I isn't going to change the Balkan Front or the Eastern Front at all, but it would definitely have an impact on the Western Front and the African Front. Let me explain. Portugal is a colonial power, so reasonably it has colonies. The two big ones are Angola and Mozambique. These two connect to the German colonies of German Southwest Africa and German East Africa. This would provide a much larger front for the British and French to fight on, which would prove to be a big struggle. Now I still expect German Southwest Africa to fall, as it wasn't very easily defended, nor really worth it economically. The southern and eastern portions of Angola would also be abandoned, as they're full of forests and hard to fight in. Cabinda would also be fought over, but eventually France would manage to take it with the help of Belgian colonial forces. What is left of Angola would become like German East Africa of our timeline, a small holdout of Central Powers forces that the British couldn't just quite conquer. With the Entente forced to occupy more territory, as well as it being much more forested and hard to supply, I can expect the most profitable portions of Angola to survive. As for Mozambique, it's very well defendable. To the south, the Brits might manage to push out to the Limpopo River, which the Portuguese would manage to defend. In the north, around Malawi, there are a lot of mountains, which would be difficult to attack into. The center of the country has the mountains as well, which would provide much more defenses. German East Africa would also be able to hold on to more of their territory, due to the British being way more spread out. Lastly, we have Portuguese Guinea, which would probably just fall to the French immediately. Portuguese Goa would also immediately fall to the British Raj, and Macau as a result could also fall. East Timor could be besieged by the Australian forces, who would be fighting against the German Pacific colonies. As of now, Portugal would lose almost every colony, except Cape Verde and Sao Tome and Principe, which would go untouched for now. The thing regarding Macau is that it's very defendable. I don't see it actually falling until China joins the war on the side of the Entente. By mid-1915, the war is getting more interesting. With the British forces being more distracted, the Ottoman Empire can stand stronger than in our timeline. In Africa, the Central Powers would still lose Togoland and Cameroon, but Angola, parts of Mozambique and Germany East Africa are still holding out just fine. In Europe, Germany might be doing a little better than historically, solely due to the British not stationing as many troops in France. These additional German gains would be very minimal however, and wouldn't change much on the actual war. Spain would be more tempted to join the Entente around the same time, but the problem is that Spain was a political and economic mess, not to speak of their poor military, so I wouldn't have them to join the war, but they can definitely profit more from it than historically. We can expect a similar 1916 and 1917, with the addition of the fronts in Angola and Mozambique, as well as the Ottoman Empire doing slightly better, due to less British soldiers being present there. The thing is that Russia would still fall to communism, and Germany would redeploy their forces westwards. In Africa, the Central Powers territory in Angola and East Africa would slowly be withered down. I don't think it's likely for Portugal to be directly invaded, as an invasion would have to happen via the sea in the Atlantic Ocean, which is a bit of a hard task to accomplish, and the British, failing their Gallipoli campaign, may be less willing to do such a naval invasion. Portugal would be blockaded however, causing their economy to start to dip. By 1918, everyone would begin to surrender. I believe that this would be a few months delayed, with the Ottoman Empire perhaps lasting until December 1918 or January 1919, before surrendering first. Bulgaria would also fall, then Portugal. Austria-Hungary would be next, and in March of 1919, Germany surrenders as well. Basically, I would have the war to be a few months longer than usual due to the new fronts, alleviating pressure from the Central Powers members, so the war being slightly longer could have some benefits for the defeated Central Powers members. For all other Central Powers members, nothing major would change. The Portuguese mainland most likely wouldn't be touched at all, neither would be their Atlantic islands. Let's start with the easy stuff in Asia. Macau would be handed over to the Chinese, but still have major British influence. Portuguese Goa would be given to the British Raj, as it's only natural. East Timor is a bit more difficult. The most likely outcome is that it would be given to Australia to administer, like Papua New Guinea. Moving to Africa, everything will go exactly the same for the German colonies. As for the Portuguese one, Portuguese Guinea would be given to France. In Angola, Cabinda and some border territories of Angola would be given to Belgian Congo, which would satisfy Belgium's outlandish land goals. Belgium is also far more likely to get away with taking more of German East Africa, not just Rwanda, Burundi, but also the whole northwest part of the colony, with the rest still going to Britain. Mozambique would be split between South Africa and the British themselves. South Africa would be given everything south of the Zambezi River, while the British would take the rest. South Africa may be expanded into Botswana and other British colonies in the region, as to help with the administration during the post-war economic downturn in Britain, where they had to merge several colonies as to save money from administration. The rest of Angola, however, is hard to divide. The terrain is very harsh and any treaty would be hard to enforce, which I think would scare away the British from wanting to take it. As for France, they would be more focused on Europe, so I suggest that a different country takes it. Italy was given vague promises of gaining German Cameroon, which were unfolded in our timeline. With the situation in Anatolia constantly shifting, Italy may be given the rest of Angola as a token of thank you, with nobody really seeing the harm of expanding Italy a little bit. Now I think that this colony wouldn't be managed well, but is it really an Italian colony if it's managed well? The other alternative is that we can be boring and just give it to the British. The rest of Portugal would be hard hit with military restrictions and war reparations. While not as bad as Germany, it would have similar effect: hyperinflation and nationalism in the interwar period. So, you know, like every nation in Europe during the 1930s. But the title of the video isn't on what if Portugal had joined Germany in World War I, it's what if Portugal joined Germany in both world wars. So we gotta keep going, with things getting much more worse for Portugal. The 1920s would be rough to say the least. Historically, Portugal had a dictatorship installed in 1933. With Portugal's situation even worse than in our own timeline, we can expect this to happen a lot sooner, and way more right-wing. I would like to propose something along the lines of Mussolini's dictatorship happening at about the same time. In the following years, Portugal and Italy could grow closer together, like the Italians and Hungarians did historically. In the year of 1929, the two countries would be very close, with Portugal getting closer to paying off their debts to the Entente. However, the Great Depression would still hit both countries very hard. The two might do a little better with closer ties, but still not enough to keep their economies away from crashing into the ground. A few years later, the funny mustache man would rise to power in Germany and become closer to Portugal as well. In 1935, the Italo-Ethiopian War would begin. I don't think anything would change at all, other than possibly Portugal sending a little support to Italy. This conflict would separate Italy from the rest of the world, as they would leave the League of Nations, forcing them closer to Germany. Portugal would follow after gaining a little aid for Germany themselves. Spain would do what they normally do and collapse into a civil war. Again, they do this every now and again as to gain attention. Portugal historically sent a bit of hate to the nationalists, but with a more right-wing Portugal, we can see this drastically increase, with Franco winning the war possibly a few months earlier. Portugal could even take a lot of Spanish refugees from the Civil War, way more than historically, so some intellectuals could help bolster the Portuguese economy temporarily. However, with the Portuguese now focused on expansionism, I could see Portugal to attempt to seize some territory from Spain, something small such as the Livenza province, which was contested between the two ever since 1811, but still something to give the Portuguese a surge in pride. It's unlikely, however, I would leave it up for interpretation. For the sake of this alternate history, I would allow it. Leading up to 1939, Germany would do what they normally do. Austria would be annexed, the Czechs would be eaten, and Memel would be taken. Italy would also annex Albania and prepare to expand their influence in the Balkans. The exact date of the start of the Second World War may change slightly, but it's nothing major. Germany would declare war on Poland, which would cause the start of the Second World War. From here, everything still happens as historically. Poland would fall, Denmark would surrender, Norway would capitulate, Germany would invade the Benelux, and France would be destroyed. Portugal would officially join the Axis about the same time as Italy would do, which is near the fall of France. However, with Portugal now in the Axis, Germany could be more convinced to invade Spain and take Gibraltar and secure resources in Spain. As I previously mentioned in my Operation Felix video, the Germans wanted to invade Spain right after the fall of France as to take Gibraltar and make the British surrender, instead of engaging in the Battle of Britain. After all, Spain would finish their civil war 8 months prior to the fall of France, and the Spanish nation was destroyed, corrupt and fielded a small unprofessional army, so Germany planned to defeat them in 1 or 2 months, take their resources and bolster their war effort. Now you can ask Napoleon how this invasion could go. While it may be easy on paper, it could prove to be a total disaster. The thing is that Francisco Franco never joined the Axis, and this was perhaps on purpose as he demanded too much, with the Austrian painter saying that he would prefer to have several of his teeth pulled out than to talk to Franco again. Regardless, this invasion of Spain would start off slow, with Germany not able to do much against the Spanish army due to their small and mountainous front line. Portugal would, however, be able to capture Galicia and the surrounding territories rather quickly. In North Africa, Germany would capture Spanish Morocco and Sidi Ifni. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Catalonia revolted again under another far-left regime. Germany wouldn't really want to waste resources on conquering this, so they could be looking to work with them. This means that the German Führer may just sign a peace treaty with Catalonia, allowing it to occupy portions of Spain and letting them exist temporarily. Alternatively, the Austrian painter planned to annex Catalonia into Vichy France in exchange for French Morocco or more concessions elsewhere, like in Dakar, which is in French Senegal. There may be an advantage for the Germans to quickly seize Catalonia, which I would allow, and they would give it to Vichy France in exchange for French Morocco. Italy would also get in on the action and seize the Balearic Islands, while Portugal and Germany would keep pounding Spain. I think that the Spanish nation would fall in a few months, with Gibraltar falling soon after. Italy would get to keep the Balearic Islands, Portugal would get to annex Galicia and push its border further much into the east. It would also formally annex the Canary Islands, but I don't think that they would ever enforce this. Germany would take the rest of Spain and set it up as a Spanish puppet state, occupying Gibraltar itself. The Germans may make a Basque puppet state as they don't want to occupy so much territory, but this is up for debate. Now that Germany has direct control over Gibraltar, British shipping into the Mediterranean would be greatly damaged. Not only that, but with an easier route to Portugal, the Azores and Madeira would be used to launch U-boat raids to further destroy Allied shipping in the Atlantic Ocean. Now I want to mention something that I forgot to mention in my Operation Felix video, and this is that the Spanish puppet state is likely going to be very unpopular and unstable, so you can bet that there would be a Spanish resistance fighter sabotaging everything their government does. Partisans would occupy parts of the countryside, so Germany likely never fully consolidates control over Spain, and this would become more trouble than it's worth. However, with the conquest of Spain, the consolidations of the Balkans would be delayed, as well as the Operation Barbarossa. While this isn't a terrible issue for the Balkans, as it would take roughly the same amount of time, Operation Barbarossa wouldn't be launched until 1942, which is after Germany declared war on America. Would Germany still attack the Soviet Union even in this scenario? Probably. The Austrian painter in charge was a madman. Now, really quickly, let me cover the African front. If Italy is given Angola, it would fall rather quickly, roughly at the same time as Italian East Africa. North Africa would be a bit different as well, with German troops focused on taking Sidi and Spanish Morocco, as well as maybe getting French Morocco. Italy would have their flank secured, but still, the Italians being the Italians, I fully expect the Brits to push them almost all the way out of Libya, before Germany turns around and tries to fix the situation. The Axis would still control Morocco, Algeria and Tunis, so Germany would begin to gain ground against the British. However, with the Americans and British landing in Morocco and Algeria in 1942, and the Axis being in a worse position, Germany would be forced out of North Africa much earlier. While we're at it, let's go to Asia. Believe it or not, something would change there. As minor as it is, Japan would invade and occupy East Timor, which would be under Australian control at the time. We finally did it, guys. A random minor European nation that did something slightly differently changed the Pacific theater. A round of applause. Other than that, I don't think that anything big would happen in the region. Japan would occupy Macau as well, which would be owned by China, but other than that, nothing. Now back to Europe. With the delayed Operation Barbarossa and the disadvantage that the Axis would be in, Germany would fail to push too far into the Soviet Union. The Baltics and parts of Belarus along with Ukraine would be captured, but Germany would be stopped before they could cross the Dnieper River. Possibly a Battle of Kiev results in a Soviet victory. From here, it would be the beginning of the end for the Axis. On the Eastern Front, there would be a standstill for a few months, maybe a year, before the Soviets begin to roll over the Germans. In Italy, the Allies would invade Sicily in Operation Husky, which would be a few months earlier. About this time, an invasion of Iberia would also be launched, with Gibraltar being taken by the Allies in the first few weeks of fighting. I think that Portugal would eventually suffer a coup alongside the Spanish puppet state, changing sides like Italy. Portugal would be restored as a democracy, which would fight for the Allies for the rest of the war. From here on now, it doesn't matter how Germany loses, as they would eventually. As for the peace treaty, let's start with the easy stuff. Everything would happen like historically, with Italy losing Angola as well, it being split yet again between Belgium and the British. Iberia would be different however. Gibraltar would be returned to the British, as well as the Azores and Madeira. Catalonia would be allowed to exist, but be forced to cede all Spanish majority regions. So I cannot really say what exactly their extent would be, probably just the Catalonia province. Maybe they gain Valencia, maybe they also gain the Balearic Islands. Now, since today I'm a Catalan nationalist, I would grant them everything that they would ever want. So this would be an independent Catalonian state that is a bit left-leaning and would be in the French sphere of influence. The thing is that Spain in this alternate history would be seen as a victim of Axis aggression, yet would still lose land, as them reasserting control over Catalonia would be problematic, and Spain had already suffered a civil war and brutal occupation, so their armed forces are pretty much weak and non-existent. In this alternate history, Spain is like Poland, they were on the victorious side but still lost land. Francisco Franco probably wouldn't be in charge of Spain as well, with a coup against the German puppet regime most likely ousting him from power. So Spain would join NATO much earlier, receive funding from the Marshall Plan and take part in the build-up of the European Union. So they lost Catalonia but would be compensated economically, arguably being better off than today. Portugal follows on the same path, but I would explore what exactly would change for them in the next chapter. Catalonia would be a different story, with relations with Spain and the rest of the Allies strained at best. With the exception of France, Catalonia may become more isolated. While they could go over to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, these two wouldn't really match them ideologically. Catalonia's economy would start to crumble, and after a few decades may request to rejoin Spain again, however with much more autonomy, or maybe the United States prompts them up and they're allowed into NATO. Spain wouldn't like this, but they're in no position to stop it from happening. Either way is possible. As the years would go on, the nations start to decolonize. The United Kingdom may hold plebiscites in the Azores and Madeira to see if they want to rejoin Portugal. I think that these referendums would pass and Portugal would be allowed to annex these islands once again. Earlier I mentioned that I think that Portugal would be better off if they were defeated in the Second World War, and this is the reason, which is decolonization. The advantage of Portugal is that they no longer have colonies and an autocratic dictatorship, so they wouldn't fight the brutal colonial wars, which lasted for longer than a decade, and would instead receive investments from the United States of America and Western Europe. This may be weird, but I truly think that it makes sense that Portugal is actually better off by losing their colonies and getting a democratic system almost 30 years earlier than historically. This should prevent millions of Portuguese leaving the country, so today instead of them having 10.5 million people, it could be 15 million people instead. This would surely have effects on Western European countries, like Luxembourg, which today has 14.5% of their population be Portuguese, as roughly 93,000 Portuguese nationals reside there, which in this alternate history could be at least half. What I'm trying to say is that this would for sure alter Luxembourg in some ways, which I think is really interesting, as the video had absolutely nothing to do with them. Further, many Portuguese went to France, with about 2 million people of Portuguese descent, so the French would also be altered slightly. Lastly, I have East Timor, which would stay with Austria for a little while before breaking away from them. They wouldn't be occupied by Indonesia in this alternate history, as they would have multiple more allies to defend them. And remember, in this alternate history, East Timor started this mess and made Portugal join the Central Powers. Other changes could happen in Africa's exact borders, as perhaps Angola and Mozambique of today, when they decolonize, are noticeably smaller, following the previous borders, with Belgian Congo later becoming the Democratic Republic of the Congo being much larger, and the result of that quite more unstable. Now I'm quite interested how the Second Congo War, also known as Africa's World War, would play out considering the changes that we have made, but I think it's safe to assume that the war would be much more deadlier. Now regarding Mozambique, they lost parts of the north to British Tanganyika and the south to South Africa, which when they decolonized likely makes for a smaller Mozambique, but also Eswatini is likely another enclave in South Africa, not just Lesotho. Apartheid South Africa is surely going to change, with the racist regime perhaps being slightly less popular due to the demographic shift, so perhaps it ends a bit sooner, but who's to say. Now like and subscribe if you have enjoyed the video, as it helps me out a lot and lets me post more frequently. Check out this video where Germany invaded Spain in the Second World War. I hope to see you there and I wish you all the best. Goodbye.